Now, as the country battles to rebuild the economy as a result of COVID-19, Free State University Chancellor Bonang Mohale has penned an extensive article on how the country's struggling economy can recover. Among some of the solutions, Mohale says all those involved in state capture should be sent to prison. Now, for more on his solutions to the economy, I am joined by him now. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. You detail in your article, of course, the new changes, the new normal, with more and more people becoming accustomed to working from home, teaching from home, learning from home. There are some expectations, especially from millennials, who are now the largest generation in the workforce, shaping society in their own image. What are some of these expectations that should be met by companies during this time?
Mpho, thank you for having me. I think it's appropriate that all of us, as a people with great natural endowments, we pay homage and indeed our respect to our departed true leader, Obabu Jackson Mthembu. So our sympathies and heartfelt condolences to the Mthembu family, but also to the entire clan. So when you look at the millennials' expectations, you have to start by saying, how much trouble are we in 27 years into democracy? Where we are today, we have debt of 3 trillion South African rands. Our borrowing is at a rate of 2.1 billion per day. Our debt to GDP ratio is now sitting at 93%. But when we include guarantees to state-owned enterprises and state-owned companies, that number shoots up to 110%. In and of itself, it doesn't mean much, but it has already demonstrated to us, beyond any shadow of doubt, that we are unable to pay, therefore, service our debt. Our debt servicing costs are sitting at 20 billion. In fact, when you look at what we collect from the South African Revenue Services, 70% of that goes only to 3 things. Number 1, of course, is to public sector wage bill. Number 2, to social security. And then number 3, to debt. So only 10 years ago, our deficit was 4%. It's now sitting at 16%. Our GDP growth for 2020 is going to be minus 8%. Our forecast for 2021 is that the GDP is going to grow by anything from 1 to 2%. But when one considers that the population growth is already at 1.5% for the last 10 years, it means in nominal terms, South Africans' discretionary purchasing power and therefore disposable income has actually been going backwards. Only in 2024 do we expect to be at pre-COVID levels in terms of GDP growth. The last 2 things for me is really a contraction in tax revenue of almost 18%. And of course, our exports have also come down, especially in the month of April, just that quarter of April. So that's why millennials know that actually we are in trouble. When the pandemic found us, we were already prostrate on the floor, having just come out of the Moody's downgrade, joining the other 2, having just come out of a technical recession. And of course, at the time that we thought that we were actually recovering from the 9 wasted years of state capture, Mpho.
There's been a lot of back and forth and a lot of questions when it comes to South Africa accessing the COVID-19 vaccine, and then some criticism on the rollout procedures of the vaccine, with some saying that government really doesn't have a clear cut-out plan and they foresee some dangers there. How much of an impact will accessing this COVID-19 vaccine have on doing some economic damage control in the country?
In fact, for us, it's a question of life and death. You see, the rich pay their taxes. And because they pay their taxes, they've got many options. The poor depend on these taxes for the provision of security, healthcare, and education. So the president has set all of us, talking about vaccines, a 67% herd immunity target. That's 40 out of the 60 million South Africans, 40 million. This is 100,000 people that needs to be vaccinated a day, every day. So when you look at the total cost, you are talking about anything depending on the type of vaccine, on foreign exchange, on the dosage, whether it's single or double dose, whether it is imported or it's locally manufactured, of course, whether it's Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson's, AstraZeneca, or even Moderna. The cost is anything from 2 billion to 18 billion when you factor all of those in. When one considers that in 2018, only 16.4% of South Africans belonged to medical aids. Therefore, the total and indeed maximum liability of medical aids and medical services is actually 7 billion, which is about 2% of all premiums. So for us, when you look at vaccines, of course, it's not the silver bullet that's going to take this pandemic away. It might actually be only the second half that we see this. We need to continue to be vigilant and practice what the president has been preaching to us during family meetings. That number one, let's work from home. Number two, let's practice social distancing, self-quarantine, put on a mask, and then wash our hands with soap and indeed running water, Mpho.
And very lastly, before we let you go, you speak about how in the past 5 years at least, the country's GDP has been less than 1.5%, which means that both our disposable income and discretionary purchasing power has been seriously eroded on per capita basis. As you paint that picture, what are some of the options available now to move out of this situation during this very unprecedented time?
You know, the National Development Commission released the review of their own work. It's NDP 2030, so now we are left with only 9 years. When they penned this, we thought we still had a lot of time. So they said we must do 9 things. By their own admission, they're saying 4 of those things have not been done. So it's unlikely that in 2030, we are going to meet our target. I don't know what we're going to blame. Are we going to blame state capture? Are we going to blame the pandemic? Are we going to blame bribery, stealing, or cheating, or even corruption? But the fortunate thing about South Africa is that all our problems are known, understood, and well articulated. But also the solutions are well known and articulated. When you started, you said, we must send the top state capture miscreants to jail. It's like the share price. What drives the share price is rumor and speculation. You want to send a message that says, as a country, we are serious about dealing with crime. Secondly, we need to secure vaccines as a question of life and death if we care about both saving lives and preserving livelihoods. Number 3, we need to embark on long outstanding, and we've been talking about this for more than 10 years, the systemic socio-economic reforms. Number 4, I think we need to reduce total government debt. Number 5, we must fix the more than 740 state-owned enterprises and state-owned companies. The last 2 for me, it's about spending money on infrastructure, not just on spending, and not just on the consumption side, but on the production side. Lastly, we have low-hanging fruit. For 10 years, we've been talking about spectrum allocation. Countries smaller than us, Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, and Swaziland, will be talking about 6G. We are not even universally, ubiquitously on 4G yet. 5G is still owned by government. We've been talking about we are going to auction the spectrum. So when you go to the World Economic Forum, IMF, World Bank, and you say, no, South Africa is going to get about 20 billion when they auction the spectrum, they roll their eyes back into their heads and say, if you tell us about spectrum auction again, we'll go mad. Because every quarter, that's what we've been saying for the last 10 years, execution is absolutely zero. Mpho.
Thank you so much for your time and sharing that with us, Professor Bonang Mohale, Free State University Vice Chancellor, talking about some of the economic reforms, Vice Chancellor, talking about some of the economic reforms needed to boost South Africa in the year 2021.